The 90s nostalgia is real. Welcome to the conversation, everybody. I'm Jessica Burbank, here to unpack the new resurgence of 90s culture and reflect on the decade that many people forgot about. Is Lizzie Ratner, who's the senior editor at The Nation magazine, and they've just dedicated their recent issue to reflecting upon the 90s. So thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about what inspired this issue.
Well, I think, the 90s often get overlooked, as you mentioned. They're sandwiched between the 1980s, the rise of the Reagan era, neoliberalism, end of the Cold War, big hair, shoulder pads, you name it. And then 2000 comes and you have this contested election, Bush v. Gore, then you have 9/11, then you have the wars on Iraq and Afghanistan in reverse order, Hurricane Katrina, 2008 Great Recession. And so the 90s are just kind of sandwiched in the middle of this. People forget about it. But if you actually stop to think about the 90s, which seemed like this tame decade, Clinton was president, there was a balanced budget, even a surplus, there was no Cold War. You actually stop to think about it and you realize that much of what happened during that decade was foundational, and that much of what's happening now can be explained if you just kind of tilt your gaze back and spend some time wandering the corridors of 90s nostalgia. And I can talk lots of ways how.
Yeah, super interested, especially, during the Clinton era. People always say he did such a good job economically, but actually the conditions of forcing the private sector to go into a recession or to go into a deficit is what led to the recession a few years later. Can you just say more about the politics of the 90s shaping the years afterwards?
Yeah, I think there are many forces at work, but just looking at sort of the two main ones in this country, the two main obvious ones, the Democrats and the Republicans, or the right and the center left, you can really see that both in terms of where we are today with the right, and then in terms of the burgeoning left, both the seeds really are laid in the 90s. So what do I mean by that? Let's talk about Trumpism and the right wing that we have today. Look back to the 90s and you have the rise of Pat Buchanan, who ran for president three times in the 90s. You have the Gingrich Revolution. You have the rise of Fox News. You have all these figures and forces that are still at work today, kind of really beginning to flourish in the 90s. And what they do is they build off and also rework the Reagan era politics into a politics of grievance, into a politics of nativism. Buchanan realized that with Reagan in power in the 80s, there was this new vacuum on the far right that could be exploited and needed to be exploited and resurrected and returned to. And that's what he sort of tried to do in the 90s. And so we start seeing this politics of grievance, as I said, that we have today. And we start seeing the return of nativism. You have Buchanan talking about building a wall or building a fence at the border. And so this sort of familiar culture warrior, angry white politics, frankly, really is promoted initially by Pat Buchanan, Newt Gingrich, and the so-called paleo conservatives of that era, picked up by Fox News, picked up by the Hannitys and Rush Limbaughs, and kind of percolates and marinates and then flourishes with Trump. So I think it's important to recognize Trump is not sui generis. There's nothing totally novel about him. His antecedents really were in the 90s. So that's kind of one side of the picture. Now let's talk about Clinton and the Democrats. They'd been wandering in the wilderness during the Reagan era and desperate to get back in power. And you have Clinton win on this kind of centrist, somewhat neoliberal platform. He gets into power and he is quickly challenged by this new and resurgent right. And he, in turn, starts migrating further and further to the right. Now, keep in mind, he was never a leftist candidate to begin with. He was perfectly happy to use racism to get his way into power and sort of throw people like Sister Souljah under the bus, or Ricky Ray Rector, who was on death row and a black man who he went back to Arkansas to murder so that he could kind of build up his campaign. So he was never a liberal, but as you start seeing the Newt Gingrich revolution and sort of he's being challenged in Congress, you have this resurgent right, he migrates rightward, embraces this kind kind of technocratic form of neoliberalism. So pausing for a second, I know I'm talking a ton, but it's hard to cram it all into such a short amount of time. You really have neoliberalism embraced at a government level in the 80s with Reagan. And that really wasn't the Democratic Party platform then. Clinton gets in and he calls himself a new Democrat, and he sort of tries to shape a new identity for the party. And it's one that embraces free market capitalism and this Reagan-style neoliberalism, but with a sort of human face. So anyway, you have these sort of Clinton migrating rightward, and also embracing this sort of neoliberal, already rightward politics. And what that does is two things. One is it leaves the right nowhere really to go except further and further to the right, because the Democrats now kind of own the center and the sort of right. At the same time, the Democratic Party is kind of dismissing and quashing the left. And with the end of the Cold War, there was this idea, well, you know what, anti-capitalism, socialism, the welfare state, the New Deal, that's all dead. That is now in the dustbin of history. So anyone who talks about that stuff is just kind of cockamamie and crazy. So there was very little dedication on the part of the Democratic Party to those ideas and to nurturing those ideas. So that's kind of a really garbled kind of mile a minute description of some of what was at work at that time in the political sphere.
I love this. It sounds like today, the 2020s are more like the 90s, beyond the blue eyeshadow coming back, right? So what can the left learn, or people who are activists or consider themselves progressives, from how similar folks were treated in the 90s?
I think there's several things. The first is that the left is in much better shape actually now than we were in the 90s. Naomi Klein has a beautiful brief essay in this 90s issue of ours that talks about the left wandering in the wilderness in the 90s. And she thinks that compared to then, the left is in much, much better shape. It's more robust. It's got a much sharper anti-capitalist analysis. It's got a feminist analysis, a decolonial analysis. It's much less significantly white. It's actually lots, powered and peopled by people of color in a way that the left, the self-declared left in the 90s was not. So we're in a better place. That being said, I think one thing that the left can always know and remember is that you just have to keep on doing the work. And even if it seems like we're wandering in the wilderness, you're planting seeds for the future. So one or two examples, and then there's actually a great quote I'd love to read from Naomi Klein's piece. But in the 1990s, in 1992, you had the LA rebellions, where Black residents and residents of all colors, but sort of Black people in LA rose up and said, the police are not going to just be allowed to beat people and get away with it. And it was huge, and it was of unspeakable significance. And there were many more sort of anti-police brutality protests in the 90s. In New York, where I'm from, there was a month of protests against the murder of Amadou Diallo. And so like people were acting then, and I think sort of that ultimately carried over into what became Black Lives Matter. 20 years later, it took 20 years, but people were acting and people were thinking and people were doing, specifically and most important of all in Black communities. The WTO protests in 1999 really did pave the way for some of what would become Occupy Wall Street, which would pave the way for Democratic Socialists of America and some of the other stuff we're seeing today. Reproductive rights movement born in the early 90s. So I think it's really important to remember that a lot of the fruit of what we're doing now, we might not see it. We might not see it for a long time, but it will bear fruit. So with that in mind, and because I'm old enough to remember the 90s well, I have to adjust my glasses because I'm old, so pardon me. So Naomi Klein writes in this beautiful essay, I often pictured us, the relatively small and marginal group that still identified as leftists in those days, as jamming our foot in the heavy door of history so that the full weight of neoliberal power would not succeed in slamming it shut completely. We bruised some toes in our efforts, but we did hold it open a crack, just enough for a new generation to come along and kick it wide open. And I feel like those words are resonant. They resonate with me as somebody who was alive back then and thinking, where is the drama? Where is the resistance? There was some, it just wasn't hugely visible, but it percolated, it bubbled, it stewed enough that other people could ultimately, sort of pick up the torch or whatever cliche you want to use, blow on the embers and allow them to burn a lot stronger.
And you've also, you and the other editors have said that there's kind of a mirroring of the political correctness we see today to that of the 90s. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I would say it's so much a mirroring of the political correctness as the culture war issues that bloomed back then are astonishingly similar. The language is slightly different. So back in the day, the right wing, which really they were the ones who fomented the culture war, and they actively, Pat Buchanan and the like, actively decided the culture war is the way to kind of win us votes and power. They were the ones who spoke out against multiculturalism as this awful boogeyman and political correctness, evil. And you really see that mirrored today in allegations and accusations against woke culture and allegations and accusations against critical race theory and things like that. And so really what's surprising is this thing that seemed like this, hoary bygone thing you'd rather not remember is now, we're reliving it. And that's a bit of a bummer, frankly, to have to go back and relive it.
You all have done such a good job reflecting upon the 90s, drawing lessons out, and really summarizing what happened. The 90s are back. I think a lot of people will go through and read that. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks.
The University of Idaho killings captured the attention of many, going viral on social media, talking about what went down. You had Brian Kohberger, who is getting a PhD in criminology, be arrested for the murder of 4 college students. This had people wondering, was he studying to become a better criminal? What is the overlap between people pursuing a career in criminal justice and those who are actually psychopaths? Welcome to the conversation. I'm Jessica Burbank. Here to unpack this today is Joseph Tully, who's a criminal defense attorney. He was a public defender in Fresno for many years, top 10 criminal defense attorney by Attorney in Practice magazine, in the nation's top 1% of the National Association of Distinguished Counsel. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So let's unpack. Yeah, of course. Let's unpack a little bit. I think about cops a lot when I think about, who is a psychopath in the criminal justice system, these people who want to exert their power and authority over others. Can you say a little bit about how you got into this topic?
Sure. I probably starting becoming a criminal defense attorney, being a public defender, I had no notion that I would become a criminal defense attorney. I didn't study for it. I didn't respect it. I had sort of the same stereotypical views as anybody did. But in being a public defender and in seeing these cases and in seeing how officers who were taught are these noble people and never lie, prosecutors and judges behaved in court, it was very eye-opening and very disappointing. And then I wrote a book in 2018, sort of based on my experiences, wanting to basically air the dirty laundry of our criminal justice system, what it's really like. And this is really before the cell phone videos came out, before George Floyd. This really predated everything. But I really delved into a lot of the psychopathic, the overlap between psychopaths who are criminals and psychopaths who are in our court system.
It's really fascinating, people talking about those who are criminals. There's this general consensus that people who commit crimes are terrible human beings. They're irreversibly bad. But some research about psychopaths, people, most of them have experienced trauma in their childhood years. Can you speak a little bit to the predestination to become someone who commits crimes? Because it's sort of been debated, right? Was Kohberger someone who was trying to understand himself better and studying criminology? What's the overlap there, and is there reverse causality?
So I do think that there is a link between the fact that his undergraduate degree was in psychology, meaning he wanted to understand how human behavior or how humans think and human behavior, and then going into criminology, there really is sort of this trackable history of, perhaps that he's questioning, why am I like this? Why am I having these thoughts? And then he goes into criminology to further understand his impulses or his behavior, his thoughts. There's a lot of overlap between psychopaths and the criminal justice system. Again, Koberger was one, coin flip away, basically. I don't know how he decided to get his PhD or to become a PhD candidate, but he could have easily gone to law school, right? And he ended up as a PhD candidate, but he was literally, one decision away from being a prosecutor that we would see in a courtroom.
Yeah, can you speak to, you were someone who represented, criminals. Have you ever found yourself in a position where you think opposing counsel could be someone who is a psychopath, or you've worked with plenty of police officers? There's this overlap of people who are seeking positions of authority with people who tend to be psychopaths. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So there was actually a study done in 2013, and I write about it in my book, where these researchers interviewed people who turned out to be career criminals. And they asked, what they wanted to be when they, were younger. And a good percentage of them wanted to be a police officer. And what attracted them was the badge, the gun, the fast car, the ability to go catch the bad guys, ironically enough, and the adoration that would come with them catching the bad guy. But really, at its core, it's fundamental that that there's a seeking to impose your power over someone. And so again, the disclaimer is that there are wonderful police officers out there. There are wonderful prosecutors out there. There are wonderful judges out there. And everybody's heard of that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts, or power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But what is a more important phrase is that psychopaths are attracted to positions of power. The positions of power are very attractive to people who want to exercise their authority over others, who want to, impose their will on others.
That's a fascinating flip of the phrase that I really appreciate, because this idea that absolute power corrupts absolutely might prevent benevolent actors who generally want to do good in the world from ever seeking power and doing good with it. So that distinction I really appreciate. Can you say more about why you decided to take the route of a public defender after initially going in as a prosecutor?
So I didn't start out as a prosecutor, but I wanted to go into internet law. It was 1998 when I was in law school when I graduated. It would have been perfect timing. I could have, gone into a very lucrative position. I was going to law school in San Francisco, right near Silicon Valley. But I moved to Fresno, and there was no internet jobs there. And I first was very dejected that the only job I could get was as a public defender. But as so often happens in life, miracles happen when you're least expecting it. And I do consider the fact that I have a trade of being a criminal defense attorney as something that's very important to my life, that I get to practice non-judgment, I get to pursue justice. It's definitely not about money. It's not a lucrative career, but you feel good and you fulfill yourself. And you were speaking earlier of, people, society in general have these thoughts about criminals. I guarantee you, if anyone were to go into a criminal courtroom where they handle motions, watch what police officers do on the stand, watch what prosecutors do, watch what judges do, see what happens every day. The executive branch, the prosecuting side of the fence has so much power in so much leeway that the system has become unbalanced, and our government needs checks and balances. That's what that runs our government. That's what causes it to properly function. And because the scales are now tipped in favor of the prosecution, we're suffering a lot of ills.
Yeah, it's very fascinating because of this idea that the people who are criminals are inherently bad, but interestingly, people who are psychopaths are seeking positions of power. They could be the police who are responsible for administering the law. They could be the prosecutor who's responsible for trying the case. We see a lot of disparity across class if you can't afford cash bail. For example, you can't afford private counsel, and therefore you're given a public defender who has an intense caseload that can't give you the representation that maybe the prosecution can. All of these problems suggest that law and justice are not necessarily the same in the United States. And a lot of this boils down to the disparities of class, but there's also this element of people who are maybe psychopaths are on opposing counsel or are tasked with administering the law. Can you speak a little bit about that, your experience with that in the criminal justice system?
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a very famous book out a number of years ago, The Psychopath Next Door. And really what I've seen in my career is the psychopath within the court system. And I think people would be very disappointed to see how an average police officer behaves in court, how the average case that we see in court, 80 to 90% of the cases could disappear tomorrow and it wouldn't affect anybody's safety. We definitely need prosecutors, good prosecutors out there for, rape, robbery, murder, burglary, all the above things. But so many of the cases that are filling up our court system are just so minor and so petty that it's just really somebody being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And if it literally were to go away, the world wouldn't be a worse place. I've seen so much lying in court by police officers. Fudging the truth is the norm. Again, there are good police officers out there, but from what I've seen from my vantage point in my career is that the good people, they don't have the power. The dominant police culture or law enforcement culture is us versus them. We're the good guys, we should catch the bad guys. And if we cheat a little bit, bend the rules or, impose our will, so be it, because, the ends justifies the means. And same thing with prosecutors. I see so much pettiness and so much ego. Ego is more controlling of our court system than justice is, unfortunately. And you were bringing up that, psychopaths, they're attracted to positions of power, but who wants to climb to the top of an organization and have power over others, right? An average person really doesn't want to. It's more trouble than it's worth. The people that rise to the top or that climb their way to the top are they're after power. And the police officers, prosecutors, and judges are no different. They're all human beings and they fall under that rule.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Really appreciate your perspective on all of this. Can you tell the people where to find more of your work if they'd like to follow it?
Sure. I'm on Twitter as Joseph Tully Law. I'm on Facebook as well. My book is California State of Collusion, and it is specific to California, but it really has a broad range, and it could apply to any state and anywhere within our country. So I'm out there, and I welcome any and all comments.
Thank you. This is so important. I really appreciate you talking about it.
I appreciate you talking about it. Thank you for bringing this to light.
Of course.
Hey everyone, Mateo Scarapo here, author of Black Buck, which is Shop TYT's first fiction book ever. I'm honored. So, Black Buck is about a young man named Darren who's living in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. He lives with his mom, he has his girlfriend, he has his best friend, he has his neighborhood, and his neighborhood has him. Darren's also working at a Starbucks in Midtown Manhattan. And one day, this man, who's real suave and good looking, comes in and asks Darren to give him his regular. But for some reason, Darren says no. This man named Rhett Daniels, who's the CEO of a startup called Someone, located on the 36th floor of the same building, is impressed. And he invites Darren upstairs, and then he extends an offer to join his elite sales team. Darren reluctantly joins, and he soon realizes that he's not the only Black salesperson there. He's the only Black person in the entire company. So he goes through hell and back in order to make it to the top. And once there, he has status, money, power, but he says, you know what? I don't like being the token Black guy. So he hatches a plan to help other people of color infiltrate America's tech startup sales teams, redefining what it means to be a minority in the workplace. This book definitely, if you couldn't tell, touches on many things that are relevant to this moment that we're all living in right now, but it's also connected to the many moments in history that have come before today. I hope that you read it, I hope that you enjoy it, and if you want to order a copy, go to shoptyt.com. Thank you, be well, and happy 2021.
Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with Breaking News with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Hello, beloveds. I have a big announcement. I'm launching a new daily 1-hour show with the Young Turks called Unbossed with Nina Turner, starting October 17th. We are going to be taking on corruption in all of its forms, whether it's big money, big pharma, the injustice system, the establishment of both parties. All that we love is on the line. They keep coming for the people, not serving the people. Now we're coming for them. Anytime anyone, anywhere tries to take power from the people, that is where we will be together on Unbossed. And not only are we going to take on these people, we're also going to have a little joy while we fight. What is life without having some joy? The channel's already up, so go subscribe now, yes, right now, at youtube.com/unbossed, TYT.
I don't care if you're Christian. In fact, I will fight for you to have your religious liberty and practice your Christianity. I believe in that. I don't believe in Christianity, which means that you do not get to dictate the way I live my life based on your religion. I don't care what the Bible says. You have every right in the world. All those women who identify with your religion have every right in the world to not get an abortion, to not take birth control, but they do not have the right to dictate my life and what I decide to do with my body. I don't care about your goddamn religion. I'm so tired of having nonstop conversations about what the Bible says. You live your life in the way that you interpret the Bible. Again, I don't care, but you don't get to take the Bible and tell me, well, the Bible says this in this chapter, in this verse. I don't care. I don't care. I don't believe in it. And I have the right, based on our Constitution, to not believe in it.
Woo! Get some!
Ice cream.
It's gonna be a crazy show, mostly because I am on a ton of drugs to maintain some sanity and deal with the cold that I'm trying to suppress as much as possible. I've already sent my team, the main show team of producers, text messages that were meant for my husband. It's gonna be a wild and wacky time, so buckle up. It's gonna be interesting to say the least, but we have a fantastic show prepared for you all today. In fact, in the first hour, I'll be interviewing Senator Bernie Sanders' former foreign policy advisor, Matt Duss. I really wanted to talk to an expert about what's currently going on in Ukraine, the United States and its relationship to Saudi Arabia, and if we have time, maybe we'll get into our foreign policy in regard to China as well. Really looking forward to that conversation. I hope you all stick around and enjoy it. In the second hour, we will have John Idarola on to talk about a whole host of important stories, some fun stories as well. We will talk about the driverless car technology featured in Tesla vehicles and some of the pretty high profile accidents that have happened recently. What does that mean? And what regulations do we have in place to make sure that we protect the lives and the safety of Americans as these driverless vehicles are both being tested and used on our roads? Really important story. And we'll also talk about how, people at Southwest apparently getting promotions after a massive holiday debacle where they canceled flights and left passengers stranded at airports all across the country. So don't miss that either. As always, just want to encourage you guys to like and share the stream. You can also become a member by going to tyt.com/join or click on that join button if you're watching us on YouTube. It's a great way to help support the show, keep us honest and independent. Although I will say, even if you're a paying member, I'm gonna speak the truth and no one's able to capture what my actual views are. So really grateful to our members because they are the kind of people who actually want to hear different perspectives and honest reporting. And thanks to them, we're able to do the show that we do, where we're obviously willing to critique both sides of the political aisle, including the side that we tend to agree with the most. With that said, let's get to our first story of the day because it appears the GOP has not learned much from their poor performance in the midterms. Apparently, Republican lawmakers in the House have learned absolutely nothing following their poor performance in the midterm elections. Now, yes, they managed to take hold of the House by a very slim majority, and that is after everyone assumed that there would be a huge red wave. Now, one of the things that reporters tend to point to is their anti-abortion stance and how unpopular that was with the general public. In fact, 2/3 of Americans wanted to maintain reproductive rights, while Republicans were celebrating the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade. Now, interestingly enough, they have decided, after gutting the IRS through their first piece of legislation, which of course is not going to pass in the Senate, their second order of business was to pass messaging bills on abortion that are not popular and honestly not necessary. Now, why would they do this? I'm not asking. Well, I am asking, but more importantly, another Republican lawmaker, Nancy Mace, is asking, why would we do this if we know it's actually going to hurt us politically? And especially when we know that this legislation might pass in the House, no chance of it passing in the Senate. It's purely symbolic. So let's get to the details of what they are proposing, what kind of legislation they want to send a message about, when they know again that it is not going to pass in the Senate. So legislation sponsored by Representative Ann Wagner, a Republican from Missouri, aimed at GOP concerns about infants who survive an attempted abortion. It would require healthcare providers to care for a child who survived an attempted abortion, a situation that is exceedingly rare. Medical providers could face up to 5 years in prison under the bill. Now that actually sounds pretty reasonable to me. In a situation in which we did not have laws indicating that a human being that's viable outside the womb, like if we lived in a country that didn't have protections for a fetus, for an infant, at that point it's an infant. So you go in, you try to get an abortion, the abortion goes wrong somehow, and you end up with, honestly at that point, since it's outside the womb, an infant that is viable. So that is a human life. And guess what? We already have laws indicating that that human life absolutely must be protected. And doing away with that viable human life outside the womb would be murder. So not only is this just a symbolic bill, it's a symbolic bill on something that we already have laws on. By the way, I should note that it is incredibly rare for that scenario to happen, where a woman goes in for a late-term abortion, the abortion goes wrong, and it ends up that there is an infant that is viable outside the womb due to a botched abortion. That is very rare. But when it does happen, as every report I've read indicates, there are protections for that infant. You can't just kill the infant after that abortion takes place, that failed abortion takes place. Now, and by the way, I should note that a law has been on the books since 2002. It's a bipartisan law that solidified, it had to solidify, even though we already had the laws even prior to that, solidified that infants have rights similar to that of full humans, because guess what? They are full humans, they are viable outside the womb. Okay, now the other piece of legislation is equally stupid and useless. The other measure is a non-binding sense of Congress resolution condemning attacks on anti-abortion facilities, groups, and churches. The fact that it's non-binding is kind of hilarious, and I just want to note, there should never be attacks on any organization. And I'm talking about violent attacks, right? So verbal attacks, you have freedom of speech, you can say whatever you want to say about pregnancy crisis clinics, where you literally have non-doctors posing as doctors, dressed as doctors, in an effort to trick women who are seeking abortions to come into those clinics and then make them feel like crap if they are really considering an abortion, and essentially convince them otherwise. That's what pregnancy crisis clinics are. You shouldn't attack them in any way violently. But what's interesting is they want to pass a non-binding resolution on that when, I don't know, guys. I mean, have you seen a lot of stories of pregnancy crisis clinics dealing with things like, arson, bombings, murder or assassination attempts? Because I don't remember stories like that littering our headlines. I do remember a lot of stories about right-wing zealots and fundamentalists attacking abortion clinics, assassinating abortion doctors. They don't want to pass any type of resolution condemning those kinds of attacks, right? And if you don't believe me, here are my receipts.
Dr. George Tiller was shot and killed in church yesterday. For years, Tiller was a lightning rod for abortion rights opponents, and his murder is sparking new fears for the safety of other abortion providers.
Advocates say they're up against well-funded organizations that are using religion and misinformation to intimidate and harass patients.
You don't think it's traumatic jumping at someone's car as they're coming to a medical appointment? You think having an abortion is trauma? You're being traumatic to them.
You're walking right into the gates of hell.
Stalking, harassment, vandalism, and then it gets worse. Death threats, arson, bombings.
It was a single bullet that killed the doctor who for 36 years weathered massive protests, bombs at his clinic, and in 1993, gunshot wounds.
Yeah, so no resolution condemning those kinds of attacks. We're just gonna pretend like religious organizations and anti-abortion organizations are the facilities under attack in this country, and we need to condemn that instead. Okay, so in other words, not only are they passing these messaging bills in the House, and again, I call them messaging bills because they've got no shot in passing in the Senate. They're bills having to do with issues that we have already dealt with and are not problems, or are not problems at all, just completely made up problems. Now look, the anti-abortion measures that have been taken by Republican lawmakers have been so unpopular that even Donald Trump tried to, back away from anti-abortion groups. I talked about that story just last week. He threw the anti-abortion, anti-choice movement under the bus because the one thing that Donald Trump does read is polling. He's interested in polling. That's all he seems to care about, polling, ratings, that kind of stuff. And I did talk about that. And it's amazing to me that he picked up on something that the Republican establishment just refuses to acknowledge. Let's watch.
It was the abortion issue poorly handled by many Republicans, especially those that firmly insisted on no exceptions, even in the case of rape, incest, or life of the mother, that lost large numbers of voters. Also, the people that pushed so hard for decades against abortion got their wish from the United States Supreme Court and just plain disappeared, not to be seen again.
Now, of course, Donald Trump bragged about the reversal of Roe, bragged about the fact that he got anti-choice Republicans confirmed on the Supreme Court. But he also realized, I guess it's not that popular with voters. I need to back away from all of that. But not House Republicans, who again have decided to dig deeper, dig in their heels, and essentially pass these or propose and go for these messaging bills in the House. Now, you know who agrees with Donald Trump on this and agrees, honestly, with most Americans on this issue? Apparently, Nancy Mace. There are some caveats. I'll get to those caveats in a second. But here is how Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace from South Carolina reacted to the GOP's efforts on these pieces of legislation. Let's watch.
It's tone deaf at this point because it's never going to pass the Senate. It's never going to get to the president's desk to be signed into law. We're only paying lip service to the pro-life movement. If you want to make a difference and reduce the number of abortions with a Democrat-controlled Senate, the number one issue we should be working on is access to birth control.
That was a shockingly reasonable statement from a Republican lawmaker. If we want to reduce abortions, what we should be focusing on is expanding access to birth control. Something that the Republican Party has no interest in doing, something that the Republican Party fought tooth and nail in preventing through the debates over the Affordable Care Act and what private insurers should and should not cover. Remember, Republicans wanted to ensure that private insurance companies weren't forced to cover birth control. They wanted to ensure that employers who provide health care are not forced to provide health care that covers birth control. That was the whole Hobby Lobby debacle that took place following the passage of the Affordable Care Act. But I love hearing a Republican, especially a Republican woman, make a common sense point about how, hey, if you don't like abortion, which look, no one likes abortion. It is a fundamental part of reproductive rights. A woman should be able to make a decision about her own body, but it would be far better to prevent having to have an abortion in the first place. And a good way to do that is to expand birth control. So I love that she mentioned that. She also said, one other thing we should probably look into is dealing with the massive backlog of rape kits in this country. Why don't we focus on that? But if you want to give her credit, there are caveats here because Nancy Mace is a Republican after all, and she's got to straddle this line between, in this case, common sense, what she's proposing here, and doing right by her religious zealot voters, I guess. Because later she defended the two bills as, quote, things that everybody can agree on. Then why are you speaking out against it? Are you speaking out against it solely due to the political risks associated with supporting bills that 2/3 of Americans are not in favor of? And more importantly, most Americans know are unnecessary because we already have laws on the books protecting human lives that are viable outside the womb. I don't know. But what I do know is that she did give a round of interviews following the reversal of Roe. And she specifically mentioned that she was disheartened to see that Republicans did not want to offer exceptions to abortion bans because guess what? She was a victim of rape herself and she opened up about that. And so since she's experienced it and she knows the weight of that kind of assault, she wants some exceptions and she was mad that some Republicans don't want those exceptions. The other thing to keep in mind is while it seems as though her district, which is South Carolina's 1st district, is solidly Republican, there is a little bit of a disparity in the female population there versus the male population. 51.5% of people living in her district happen to be female. So I think there might be a personal experience element here.
maybe wanting to seem more moderate on reproductive rights to appeal to female voters in her district is a part of this as well, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, even when her instincts are correct, even when she acknowledges that the path the Republican Party is going toward is an unpopular one and one that most American voters don't want, she still cowers and bows her head to the mainstream Republican Party by putting out these ridiculously embarrassing statements like, I think these are proposals we can all agree on. But you're not agreeing to them. You think that it's dumb for Republicans to go for it, so why are you speaking from two sides of your mouth? Just tell us what you really think, stop playing games, and more importantly, when you're right, you should flaunt it. You were right, Nancy Mace. This is stupid, and it's a huge waste of time, and if all you care about is how Republicans in the House look right now, yeah, they look pretty bad. When the first thing they did was gut the IRS specifically so the IRS won't audit wealthy people. And then the second thing they did was push for anti-abortion policies that clearly the majority of Americans don't want and don't find popular. But you know what? I don't like the Republican Party, so this is great. We know that they're not gonna be able to actually get anything passed through the Senate. They keep promoting things that are unpopular, which hurts their chances of getting reelected in the next election. Go for it, have fun. And if Nancy Mace thinks that she can talk some sense into the Republican Party, she's got another thing coming. We'll see what happens. Looking forward to seeing what kind of consequences basically resort from these honestly ridiculous messaging bills. All right, we do not have any more time in this segment because we do have an interview and I don't want to waste Matt Duss's time. So why don't we take a break, and when we come back, Matt Duss will join us to talk a little bit about the Biden administration's foreign policy. We'll touch on Ukraine, Saudi Arabia, a little bit of Iran, and possibly China. Don't miss it, we'll be right back.
The rest of the news media says you should not fight for positive change. If you do, you're not really a reporter or a journalist, because reporters and journalists don't care what happens. I don't agree. That's not written anywhere. That's not a law. It's just a rule that they invented so that reporters didn't actually challenge the people that are in power. Well, we don't agree with that. We think we should challenge the people in power, that actually makes you a better journalist, not a worse one. Joining me now, legendary whistleblower and American hero, Edward Snowden. First question is, hey, where are you?
I'm in my apartment in Moscow.
All of a sudden, in the studio, Jim Gaffigan, everybody.
Mental illness is, completely undiagnosed in our society.
It's not about a particular administration. It's about a broken system of power, and through that, really, the instrumentalization of a system of not justice, but injustice.
People understand whether they claim to deny climate change or not. Our collective house is in crisis. We're also dealing with the legacy of 40 years of economic policies that have made people's lives more precarious.
Sometimes you got to force people into their humanity. Sometimes you have to shake people into empathy.
Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us in the studio.
Healthcare is a basic human right, and we are fighting for basic human rights.
In order to actually achieve that vision of everyone having access to the same resources and getting to determine the outcome of their life, we have a lot of work to do, and it needs to start right now.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to green with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
Welcome to the Damage Report. I'm John Idarola. This is gonna be a big one.
What Donald Trump has done as president has cut taxes for the wealthy and made life better for rich people. But he's made life worse for poor people.
We're making America great again by throwing more money at the military to destroy other countries, because that makes us great instead of investing it in ourselves.
That it's Donald Trump and it's Stephen Miller The choosing is based on wanting to create cruel and inhumane conditions to scare other people away from ever coming to the United States.
The opportunity to make money off of tragedy is the American way.
There's only one place to put garbage people: in the trash.
We've never had so much access to so much information with so little idea of what the hell is going on.
What does enforcing our borders have to do with traumatizing children? Absolutely nothing.
I think a sane person could say the current situation we have right now is radical. But what we're doing is literally making the world more like hell. That's a warning sign.
ShopTYT.com now has books. One of them is Ryan Grimm's book, We've Got People. That's a saying that AOC said, they've got money, we've got people. It's the best tracing of the AOC victory I have seen anywhere. It's the most accurate, and it's got great details. The book actually goes all the way back to Jesse Jackson and how he was the original Bernie Sanders. If you want to know how we're going to win going forward, those lessons are super important, and they're in Ryan's book. So check it out right now at ShopTYT.com.
We found the perfect person to lead the army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country, so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
Ice cream.
Welcome back to TYT, everyone. Super excited for the conversation I'm about to have. So buckle up. We're about to just get a lot of important information about foreign policy and how the Biden administration has performed when it comes to issues involving Ukraine, Saudi Arabia, China, and more. Joining us now is Matt Duss, former foreign policy advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, who recently co-authored a fantastic piece in the New Republic titled "A Better Biden Doctrine." 2 years in, how well has Biden kept his 2020 promises on foreign policy? It's an excellent piece. I highly recommend everyone read it, but I also highly recommend you stick around for this great interview featuring Matt Duss. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to come speak with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anna.
I really enjoyed your piece because I think it was such a great, comprehensive, almost like a report card on how the Biden administration has performed foreign policy wise. And it really is a mixed bag. I think there are areas where I think the Biden administration has actually significantly improved upon what we experienced under Obama's administration. But there are some weak spots. So before I get to the weak spots, before we even get to Ukraine and all of that, I do want to just kind of ask you, where do you think Biden has actually done well and improved from the Obama era?
Right, and I think the approach that my co-author Stephen Wertheim and I took here was to not talk about what do we think the ideal, not to measure the Biden administration and against what we think would be kind of the progressive ideal. It was to hold them to commitments and goals that they themselves laid out on the campaign trail, in the Democratic Party platform in 2020, and see how all that's going. And I think one of the things that is really significant, and we mentioned this in the piece, is first of all, there has been a break from the era of neoliberalism. I think if you look at Biden's speech to Congress back, I think it was April 2021, that was really a remarkable speech because it essentially said, the old Washington consensus is over. The American government, the US government will now be spending money to take care of the American people. We're going to be investing in our communities. The old idea that you just cut taxes and that promotes growth and everyone benefits. Like a lot of these old economic arguments are over. And I think that's really important because that's a shift that we did not see from Obama. A lot of the old economic logic, both domestically and globally, sort of held under Obama. And so I think that is kind of one of the key underpinnings of the Biden administration's approach, is, whether it comes to trade, whether it comes to, the CHIPS Act or the IRA. A few other things I would mention. There's, at least, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I have I don't know if it's a provocative question in response to what you just said.
We like those. Yes.
But I am curious, I've heard Senator Sanders say on multiple occasions that he's genuinely friends with Biden. I'm wondering how much of an influence Senator Sanders has had on President Biden on the issue of neoliberalism.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a good question, and I think it's, yes, he does have a relationship going back many years with Joe Biden from their time in Congress and their, together, and also as the second place finisher in the 2020 Democratic primary. I think the Biden team, made a very good faith effort in reaching out to the Sanders team, to me personally, and to some of my colleagues who worked on the Sanders campaign and engaged with us. But I think it's beyond just a personal relationship. Bernie Sanders he is part of a movement. I mean, his slogan in 2020 was "Not me, us," and I think that is very much what he continues to represent in the party, in the country, and also when he talks to Biden. So he can speak for a number of values and policies and principles. But I think it is to to Joe Biden's credit and to his team's credit and his administration's credit that they recognize that this is an increasingly influential and well mobilized and well organized force within the Democratic Party. I mean, the progressive movement on a whole range of issues. And they have engaged with it and considered their ideas and brought some of them on board, not all of them. Mm-hmm. But I think you can clearly look at the platform from 2020 and clearly look at the way they talked about a lot of these issues since then, and chart the influence of the progressive movement.
One of the things that Biden has done, and it really hasn't gotten much attention, I think by design, I think the Biden administration wants this, is the rollback of the expanded drone war that we saw both under the Obama administration and the Trump administration. Now, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a reason why the Biden administration is avoiding any type of public bragging about that. And it might be because there's this fear that Republicans will give them a tough time.
Right, I think, that's exactly right. I mean, let's just draw back. I think one of the main kind of the approach to foreign policy from the Biden administration generally is they want to spend as little time as necessary fighting about foreign policy, and that does make some sense. They want to focus on delivering goods for the American people. They've got other priorities. Foreign policy certainly needs to be one. But as the point we make in the piece is, while yes, we recognize there have been a number of steps the administration has taken that are very good on the war on terror, like the diminishing of drone strikes is a very important one. And again, going back to what I said earlier about the influence of the progressive movement on this administration, ending forever wars is an agenda item that the progressive movement generated, that Senator Sanders adopted along with a number of other candidates in the 2020 primary, and that the Biden administration took on board. But the downside of doing these things without fanfare, which they're doing for exactly the reasons you said, because they don't want to have to put up a target that could attract attacks from right-wing demagogues in all the usual ways we know, is if you want to really change the consensus, if you want to create a new and durable consensus around the use of force, around the use of military violence, you really do need to get into a public debate and explain your position and get political buy-in, not just from the Congress, but from the American people. And so I think that is one of the downsides for doing these things without fanfare. The other downside is that you do, if you're not really changing these things in legislation, you're basically leaving these tools on the table for future and potentially much worse administrations.
Absolutely, that's such a good point. I want to move on to Ukraine, because this is an issue that I'm trying to figure out where I stand, because when the war began, I was 100% behind helping Ukraine defend itself, especially since the United States had made security commitments to Ukraine after Ukraine had given up its nuclear weapons in the 1990s. But now I'm starting to feel a little uneasy with how much military aid is getting funneled to that effort. I'm also feeling a little uneasy about how Ukraine is feeling more comfortable with, some of these offensive attacks because it could potentially escalate the war with a nuclear power, and I don't think that would be a good thing. As a foreign policy expert, where do you stand on the issue?
Yeah, no, I think the questions and concerns you raise are totally valid and legitimate, and I share some of them. I think, my position on this, I wrote a piece in the New Republic last June about why I think supporting the defense of Ukraine is important for the left. I got some agreement, I got some disagreement on that, but again, I appreciate all of it because I do think this is a really important kind of discussion about principles to have for the left to have. My own view is, I think the Biden administration has set out 3 really important, goals in what they want to achieve in supporting Ukraine. One is not to be drawn into a US-Russia war or a NATO-Russia war, not to involve US troops. President Biden took US troops off the table very early on, quite rightly. The second is to, assist Ukraine in defending its own territorial sovereignty. The third is to create a strategic defeat for Russia because of its invasion of another sovereign state. I think people can have, really legitimate questions about, okay, how does this end? I have those questions myself. I think the administration's case, as they have said various times in public, is, they want to continue to support Ukraine in retaking territory, but also to put Ukraine in the best possible position for negotiations when those negotiations become possible. And I am among those who believe that we need to continue to seek, options for a diplomatic resolution to this. But, as I see it, there is no evidence as yet that Vladimir Putin is interested in that option. He is, as far as I can see, is interested in continuing to prosecute this war. But still, I think we should continue to look for those options and those opportunities. I think the Biden administration is looking for those opportunities. We have, outreach from the administration and contacts and conversations at various levels between the US and Russia, between the US Secretary of Defense and the Russian Defense Minister. Late last year, we saw the public, it was publicized that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had been in contact with close advisors to Putin to identify any possible opportunity to end this. But again, to repeat myself, I think as yet, Putin doesn't seem to be interested in that.
When it comes to peace negotiations, one thing that I've noticed is as the United States has been more and more willing to provide military aid to Ukraine, we've been hearing less and less from Volodymyr Zelensky that he is willing to engage in peace negotiations himself. Now, he might be willing to engage. And obviously the peace negotiations involve some compromise, including potentially giving up some regions of Ukraine to Russia. Do you at all feel that the military aid might be compromising Zelensky's willingness to compromise and potentially engage in those negotiations? I think you're right about Putin, but I am also worried about what our aid could potentially do, some unintended consequences of that aid when it comes to Zelensky.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, my own view, Zelensky, my feeling is that if Zelensky felt that he could end this war and end the killing of Ukrainians in a way that was sustainable, that would not simply lead to future conflict, he would be interested. But I also think that Zelensky, and again, I've not spoken to him, so I don't want to speak out of my experience here. But we also have to understand politically what we have seen, the actions that Russian forces have taken in these cities that they have occupied and that have been taken back, the atrocities that have been carried out. I don't need to go into details here. You've seen them, your viewers have probably seen them. Just these are outrageous. And so for Zelensky as the president of Ukraine to be talking about seeking peace is politically difficult. Now, I think there are conversations that are going on behind the scenes all the time between the United States and Ukraine to look for these opportunities. But again, I would put the onus on it where I think it belongs, which is on Russian President Vladimir Putin, who started this war and is the one who could potentially end it.
I want to move on to Saudi Arabia because that is probably one of the main areas where I personally have the most critique or criticism toward the Biden administration. Recently, Senator Bernie Sanders wanted to revive a resolution that was vetoed. It was a bipartisan resolution that was vetoed by Donald Trump, and it essentially pulled US support toward the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. When Donald Trump vetoed it, there was a lot of backlash from Democratic voters, liberal news outlets and all of that. But when Senator Sanders wanted to revive it and it was squashed by the Biden administration, there was very little criticism from the very same people. What really I don't know if you're privy to it, but what was going on behind the scenes, and why do you think the Biden administration wanted to squash that resolution?
Well, I think there's a few things. One is, the situation has changed to some extent. I don't think it's changed enough. I mean, Stephen and I talk about this in the piece. I mean, certainly the Biden administration, as a candidate, Joe Biden supported the War Powers resolution that Senator Sanders and his colleagues passed in 2019. Early on in this administration, President Biden came out and announced an end to the quote offensive support for the Saudis in Yemen, although they would continue defensive support. We never fully got an explanation of what that really meant. But still, the situation has been improved. Has it been improved enough? I don't think so. Senator Sanders clearly does not think so. One thing I would also note is that the Biden administration also created the Office of Special Envoy for Yemen, Tim Lenderking, a skilled State Department diplomat whose job is to reach a diplomatic end to this conflict. So I would just note the situation has changed a bit, not enough in my view. But I would also kind of draw it back and look at the broader US-Saudi relationship. Yemen is obviously hugely important. It's one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. But I think the question of the US-Saudi relationship is an area where I think I have been very disappointed in the way the Biden administration has acted. President Biden, as a candidate, said, I will make him a quote pariah. Because of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. They started off, they released the US intelligence report indicating that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, clearly was implicated in this murder. But since then, they've slowly but surely moved back to the norm, which is a very close relationship and very few, if any, consequences for Saudi's behavior abroad or its repressive behavior at home. And I think this is a real failure of the Biden administration.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, but at the same time, one of the factors that's really pushing the Biden administration in the direction it's been going in when it comes to Saudi Arabia is that we're at the mercy of the OPEC plus cartel when it comes to oil production, and Saudi Arabia is clearly in that group. We're reliant on them in producing a certain amount of oil in order to keep gas prices down, energy costs down. I have mentioned the possibility, this would never happen, at least not anytime soon in the United States, but the idea of nationalizing natural gas, oil, the resources we have right now, it's under the control of these multinational corporations who sell to the highest bidder on the international market. Would that be in your mind, a potential solution to kind of, in the short term, wean us off of our reliance on, the international oil market?
I think, dealing with, as you know, energy is a global market. So even if we are not, the kind of the shorthand version of the US-Saudi relationship has always been like, we give them security, they give us oil. I think that's simplistic, but it does get to a basic truth of the relationship. I think an approach here, and this goes to a bill that Senator Sanders introduced last year in the wake of the the Russian invasion of Ukraine, along with Congresswoman Cori Bush and Congressman Jason Crow, the US Energy Independence Act. And what this proposed was that the Biden administration use its executive authorities to seriously ramp up green renewable energy. Because ultimately, I think that is the way to wean us off of this dependence of not only of fossil fuels, but to make us less dependent on the whims of authoritarian, corrupt rulers like Vladimir Putin and Mohammed bin Salman. As Senator Sanders said in the statement, it is, we need to get out of this cycle where we go hat in hand to our corrupt authoritarian allies to help us against our corrupt authoritarian enemies. Because that's the cycle we continue to be caught in as long as we are dependent on these fossil fuels.
Totally agree with you on that. I mean, it was kind of stunning to see the Biden administration go to Venezuela and engage in some pretty, diplomatic talks in order to work with them with,
And that's something they should have done anyway.
I agree.
But yes.
But that was after Biden got elected and said Juan Guaido was the rightful leader of Venezuela, even though he was never elected. That was crazy. But anyway, all right, final question for you. We're running out of time, unfortunately. I wanted to ask about your views on China. So in the piece, you write, quote, Biden has repeatedly said that he does not seek a Cold War with China, but his policy repeatedly tells a different story. His repeated gaffes on Taiwan, vowing to send US troops if China attacks, may have made war more rather than less likely. So that's the area where I definitely agree with you. I think the gaffes are pretty disastrous. And what adds to it is members of Congress, people like former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi traveling to Taiwan and kind of adding to the tensions. What's really behind it? Because honestly, my view is we allowed for US-based companies to exploit cheap labor in China. China has started kicking our ass economically, and now US officials are like, oh, China's the enemy.
No, that's absolutely right. And again, I would refer to a piece that Senator Sanders wrote in Foreign Affairs, and I think it was April 2021, where he made this point. He was like, 20 years ago, the absolute unassailable consensus was that we are going to let China into the WTO, and they'll, companies will go to China, and the Chinese people will get rich, and then obviously they will become much more politically liberal. Now that obviously has not worked out. But 20 years later, 22 years later, the new unassailable consensus is that China is our enemy, and we must do everything we can to compete and repress China's economy, lest they replace us as the rightful global hegemon. And maybe we should just hit the brakes and question this consensus, just as we should have more energetically questioned the previous consensus. I mean, I think the point that Stephen and I tried to make is it is good that President Biden says these things about not seeking a Cold War, about seeking areas of cooperation, because this is absolutely essential. We cannot address shared global challenges like climate, like pandemic, just to name two obvious examples, without at least trying to cooperate with China. And yet the story that his policy is telling, whether it's, a few months ago, there was a set of restrictions announced on the semiconductor industry that are extremely severe, that essentially seem to be trying to crush the Chinese semiconductor industry. Now there is a security logic behind this, but the tracks that are being laid down right now point us toward a future of real severe competition, if not conflict, with China. And the fact of the matter is, China is going to be there. We need to find some way of coexisting. And in saying this, I do not downplay or diminish the real problems that China poses, both globally and internally. I mean, what China is doing in Xinjiang to the Uyghurs is absolutely atrocious. There is no question. The repression of its own people around the country, obviously a huge problem. But again, we need to we need to find ways to keep talking and identifying possible areas of cooperation, and not just put ourselves on a track of conflict.
Yeah, I really appreciate your dialectical approach to foreign policy. I think it's really important, especially at a time when people tend to report on these things in a very black and white way. You're either on one side or the other. And honestly, with these issues, and as complex as they are, it's not that easy. It's not that cut and dry. Matt Duss, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and joining us today. Everyone, please check out the piece that he co-authored, A Better Biden Doctrine, which is featured in New Republic. Thank you again, Matt.
Thank you, Anna. Great to be here.
All right, everyone, have a few minutes, take a little break. We're gonna come back in a few and talk a little bit about, well, what we could actually do in this country if we value human lives. The expansion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act has had a real impact on maternal mortality rates in the states who chose to expand the Medicaid program. So we'll give you the new study on that and more coming right up. Don't miss it. We'll see you in a few.
Ice cream.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to our social break. Eclectic Miscellanea in our member section says, sorry you're feeling sick, Anna. Thanks for powering through it to give us the news, but hope you're taking time to take care of yourself too. I booked Matt Duss on the show yesterday, so I was like, I'm definitely gonna do the show. I'll find a way to make it happen, and I'm glad I did. And I'm feeling okay. I'm on, a lot of Dayquil, and it's just like a cold. I don't have COVID, trust me. Jenks Left Tricep of Fury says, this is good news for us. Let the Republicans die on this hill, meaning the anti-abortion stuff. More seats for us in 24. Yes, but I also don't want Democrats to think that all they need to do is let Republicans destroy themselves. I want them to actually work for us as well and work on some of the priorities that Democratic voters have. So that's the other side of the issue. And I think the Democratic Party has relied too much on campaigning on how terrible Republicans are, while kind of failing to fulfill some of their campaign promises to their voters. We've got Jared Cannon who says, Anna and Cenk, the bonus episode last night, the wit, the ESA snake, and your response was hilarious. The strangle part is the exact argument I make. The only reason they don't eat us is because they're not bigger than us, meaning snakes. We were talking about the emotional support animals. That's what ESA stands for. If you're not a member, you're missing out. tyt.com/join. Al Belzo says, it's not simply the US giving aid to Ukraine. Many countries who are part of NATO and the European Union are giving military aid. It doesn't look great though, because it doesn't look like Russia is giving up anytime soon. So that's another perspective on Ukraine and the military aid. And you're right, but let's keep it real. The United States has provided the bulk of military aid. I mean, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars already, and I have no doubt that we will approve tens of, did I say tens of billions? It was tens of billions, right? Yeah, of course, it's military weaponry, super expensive. I'm sure there will be a lot more. Let's go to Moonbur, who says, I guess my question is exactly, what is the concern? Are we worried that Russia is gonna start actually threatening nukes, like beyond posturing? Is it the money we think they'd spend on the American people versus the aid? Because I thought the aid money was old money allocated for Afghanistan, now for Ukraine. I don't know about that last part. I haven't read anything about that, but you could be right. I gotta look into it. I think my concern is, look, defense contractors are gonna exploit any international conflict for their own monetary gain. And I'm worried that we might be blinded by our willingness to support Ukraine to Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian with you. Let's get right to our next story because it shows that, when you expand healthcare and when people without, ton of money to pay for private insurance get the coverage they need, their outcomes are a lot better. Less hospitalizations, less death. So let's talk about it. There's now new data showing how Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act has actually yielded some significant gains when it comes to maternal mortality. Something that the United States should be incredibly embarrassed about because we have the highest mortality rates for mothers compared to other developed countries. So in this case, the report focuses on how Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act helped lead to a decline in postpartum hospitalizations and deaths. So as the Hill reports, states that expanded Medicaid under the ACA, Affordable Care Act, saw a 17% drop in hospitalizations among women during the first 60 days postpartum. So I didn't know this, but many hospitalizations of new mothers happen postpartum, right? Not when they're pregnant, although that happens as well. And when you live in a system that really mostly relies on privatized healthcare, that is astronomical, a lot of Americans can't afford it if they're not receiving it through their employer, well, you're gonna see high mortality rates. And in this case, of course, we're talking about maternal mortality rates. So compared with 10 other developed countries, the United States ranks worst when it comes to maternal mortality, while data show over half of maternal deaths occur in the postpartum period. The United States is also the only developed country that does not guarantee access to provider home visits or paid maternal leave during this period, according to the Commonwealth Fund. So this is why I don't believe the anti-choice organizations who say that their stance on abortion has to do with human lives or saving human lives. Because if they genuinely cared about human lives, there's about a million other things they could do that would actually improve healthcare in this country, that would actually improve the likelihood of a new mother surviving postpartum. But they don't focus on any of that at all. All they seem to focus on is just banning abortion in the country. And I think it's really about controlling women, and I think it's about punishing women who are dealing with unwanted pregnancies. Because in their minds, you shouldn't engage in any sexual behavior unless you are doing so to procreate, because they're lunatics who want to control our personal lives, and they really have no place doing so. But nonetheless, let's go back to the topic at hand, because again, we're talking about actually saving human lives through improving our healthcare system. Now, in this case, it was through the expansion of Medicaid, which not every state accepted and adopted. So even today, we have an issue with that. Medicaid expansion permitted states to cover most adults with incomes up to 138% of the federal poverty level, allowing a larger share of low-income individuals to qualify for coverage. So when the Affordable Care Act passed, states were notified that they can expand their Medicaid programs with federal money. So the federal government was like, yo, take our funds, take the money so you can expand your state Medicaid programs to cover more people. But not every state accepted it. Until this day, we have about 11 red states that have given the federal government the middle finger to own the libs. Yeah, real slick, okay? Risk the lives of your own constituents to own the libs. Congratulations, you guys are really nailing it. So let's talk about that. To date, 40 states, including DC, have adopted the Medicaid expansion, and 11 states have not adopted the Medicaid expansion. Okay, so which states are we talking about? Why don't we take a look at this handy map of the United States. All of the yellow states indicate the states that have refused to adopt the expanded Medicaid program: Wyoming, Texas, Kansas, Wisconsin, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and North and South Carolina. The reason why South Dakota is a lighter shade of blue is because the state did in fact adopt expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, but for some reason they have decided that they're not going to implement it, or they haven't implemented it yet. I don't know what's going on with South Dakota. I think it's weird, especially because, again, we're talking about states rejecting federal money that would improve the lives of their own constituents. They're like, nope, we'd rather own the libs. Okay. Now, I want to give you some more details on that because it's just so ludicrous that these states refuse to expand their Medicaid programs. So an estimated 700 to 900 women in the United States died of pregnancy-related causes in 2016. That's pretty bad. But the numbers have only either remained terrible or in recent years have gone up a little bit. So in 2020, for instance, 861 women were identified as having died of maternal causes in the US compared with 754 in 2019. The maternal mortality rate for 2020 was 23.8 deaths per 100,000 live births compared with a rate of 20.1 in 2019. Now, the coronavirus pandemic probably contributed to the increase in maternal mortality rates. A lot of hospitals were slammed with COVID patients. Maybe some pregnant mothers didn't want to go to the hospital either while they were pregnant or postpartum, just to avoid the possibility of being exposed to COVID patients. I don't know, but I would be shocked if COVID didn't contribute to some extent. But we should look at some specific states here, like Georgia, for instance, one of the states that has refused to adopt the expanded Medicaid program. Georgia has the second highest rate of maternal mortality, so that's 48.4 per 100,000. Georgia's maternal mortality review issued a 2017 report that said the areas of highest concern include inadequate follow-up of cardiovascular symptoms in pregnant women and failure to recognize and treat hypertension or hemorrhages soon enough. By the way, researchers have reported that in more than 1/3 of cases, they were unsure of when prenatal care began for mothers and confirmed that some who died received no prenatal care at all. Gee, I wonder if concerns about the cost of prenatal care played a role there, especially in a state that refused to expand Medicaid for mothers, pregnant women who, maybe don't have the means to get coverage through the private insurance market. Now, other Medicaid denying states aren't doing so well either when it comes to mortality. So let's take a look at that. Alabama's one of those states. So 36.4 mothers die per 100,000 in the state of Alabama. In Texas, it's 34.5, and in South Carolina, 27.9. Why don't we compare that to a state like California, which of course actually protects reproductive rights and also, of course, has expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, has the lowest maternal mortality rate. So 4 mothers die per 100,000 deaths. I'd like to see that number go down to 0 because I actually care about human lives, as opposed to the anti-abortion advocates out there who have focused all of their attention on zygotes and embryos. When it comes to living, breathing humans, when it comes to providing the healthcare we all need to live and thrive, they don't seem all that concerned about that, do they? It's almost like the anti-abortion movement is really about control and punishment. All right, everyone, we have more first hour stories that we have not gotten to yet. I'm gonna do the student debt relief story anyway and go over a little bit because it's important and I don't think John read it. So let's do it.
Administration released a detailed plan that will make it easier for student loan borrowers to get rid of their debt using income-driven repayment plans and could cut some payments in half.
Now that the constitutionality of Biden's student debt forgiveness plan is being hashed out in the Supreme Court, the Biden administration has decided to rewrite at least one important portion of his proposal that would, in my opinion, have a massive positive impact should it actually be implemented. So this is aside from the up to $20,000 that Biden's plan would have forgiven. This is the part that I didn't think received the attention it deserved. We talked about it on the show, but it has to do with the student loan forgiveness plan and the income-based repayment program. That is going to be overhauled by the Biden administration in a good way, but there is a caveat. Stick around for the caveat, it is important, but here are the details. The plan to reform income-driven repayment plans, or IDRs, was first announced in August, but was overshadowed by the Biden administration's blueprint for forgiving up to $20,000 in debt per borrower. But with the debt relief program stopped in its tracks by legal challenges and now headed for the conservative-leaning Supreme Court, the Education Department said it is moving forward with the other part of its plan, which will overhaul the IDRs with the goal of helping lower and middle income borrowers. So let's talk about that a little bit. What would the reforms include? I think the reforms are important. I think they're actually going to improve the lives of student borrowers. But the real question is whether the federal government has the resources necessary to implement it. So here's what Biden wants to do. He wants to make it easier for borrowers to qualify for debt forgiveness after paying their loans for 10 years instead of 20 years. So if student borrowers are paying back their federal student loans for 10 years, at some point, after that, they will qualify for having the entirety of their remaining balance forgiven. Those enrolled in the plan would have their monthly payments cut in half, capping them at just 5% of their discretionary income. Now, prior to the proposed reforms, monthly payments accounted for 10% of the borrower's income. Now, as a result, a typical borrower will save around $2,000 a year, thanks to the reforms that the Biden administration is planning to implement. Now, those who earn $30,000 or less per year will not have to make payments on their federal student loans until they are earning more income to be able to make those payments. So if you are a low income student borrower who is making less than it's actually $30,500, you're not going to be expected to pay back your federal student loans until you actually make enough income or income above that amount. And the other thing that Biden is dealing with is the exploding interest rate issue, where even if you're making payments monthly, you're trying to get that principal down, a lot of students have noticed that their remaining balance is actually increasing. So the Biden administration plans to do something about that as well. But there is a huge problem here, and that problem has to do with whether the FSA, the federal student agency, has the resources necessary to actually implement this plan. In fact, they were pretty, they were blindsided by this announcement. So the federal student aid, group basically spoke to NPR, and they're like, "We did not expect this. We don't have the money for this." Okay, so Biden's student loan forgiveness rollout could be complicated by the fact that the Office of Federal Student Aid was supposed to receive a bump in their budget, but because of some squabbling between Democrats and Republicans, it didn't end up happening. Behind closed doors, officials at FSA and the US Department of Education are surprised and angry because they must now safeguard priorities like today's announcement, while also scrambling to find hundreds of millions of dollars to cut from other current and future programs. In its initial 2023 budget proposal, the Biden administration pitched increasing FSA's budget by a third, to the tune of $2.65 billion. But during bipartisan wrangling among congressional negotiators and the White House last month over funding the federal government, Republicans initially offered a roughly 20% budget increase for FSA. Which, by the way, FSA was like, okay, I mean, it's not the amount that we want, but it's a pretty significant bump in our budget, so we'll take it. But something else happened. Republicans offered the budget increase with a caveat. And the caveat known as a rider was this: the money could not be used to implement Biden's debt relief policy. And so since Democrats didn't agree to that, guess how much of a bump FSA received for their budget this year? Nothing, no increase at all. So that's the issue, right? So the Biden administration makes these announcements, and we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. But I feel like oftentimes, especially when it comes to the student loan issue, they set themselves up for failure. You gotta cover all your bases and make sure that the federal agency dealing with this issue has the resources necessary to implement what you are saying you want to implement. So I don't know if this is actually really gonna go anywhere, because again, if you don't have the money to actually implement it, you're not gonna be able to implement it. We'll stay on the story. We'll make sure we report any of the updates to it. But again, if the federal agency doesn't have the resources, there are gonna be delays and all sorts of complications in actually implementing what I believe is an important and good idea here. All right, we gotta take a break. When we come back for the second hour, John Iadarola will be with us. We'll talk about how Tesla has been failing with its driverless feature and more. Don't miss it.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them. Turn them into lav mics. I mean, they were incredible. And then one guy walked in and gave us a really expensive switcher and said, you guys need this, and walked out. Okay, it's amazing. They helped us build a studio. They did a $2 million funding campaign for us. And so they really are us. We do this show together to the point where some of our hosts are even former listeners. So when we say that the audience is part of TYT, we really mean it.
I think what the audience also appreciates is especially if they're members, they really get an inside look into who we are, our personal lives, what drives and motivates us. It goes beyond just storytelling. I think that what we do is allow our viewers and our listeners into our daily lives, and we give them kind of like this inside look into everything that we're passionate about and why it is that we're doing what we're doing, right? Like the motivation behind what we're doing, I think is important for our audience to know, and we're not shy about sharing that with them. And it's different from what people typically see in legacy media outlets, where everything is kind of dry and robotic and there's really no personality or authenticity that comes along with it. Oftentimes when we're doing the show, I don't really think of it as me telling them stories. I think of it as us having a mutual respect and conversation with one another. And as I said earlier, I mean, not only do I feel that through the work I do, I'm informing our audience, but they inform me oftentimes as well. You know, they'll pitch stories to us. They'll tell us, you know, a certain perspective or angle to a story that we might have missed. And I love it.
Universal health care, raising the minimum wage, doing something about climate change and gun violence and an unjust justice system that locks up black and brown folks. We're not going for the okie doke no more.
I think Nina Turner is the leader of the progressive movement right now.
It is absolutely a sin and a shame to be in the 21st century in America and having people who are elected to office not only try to separate us, but also use public policy to make it harder to vote.
The questions that we get asked is how you gonna pay for it? I say, we gonna pay for it the same way we pay for the tax cuts. That's how we gonna pay for it. We gonna pay for it in the same way that we give military industrial complex contractors. That's how we gonna pay for it.
If standing up for universal health care or Medicare for all is wrong, Jink, I don't want to be right. If believing that working people deserve to have paid family and medical leave is wrong, I don't want to be right. If wanting everyday people of this nation to live a good life is wrong, then I don't want to be right.
And we are being tested whether we have courage enough, conviction enough, people power enough to stand up and do what is right for ourselves and generations yet unborn.
I'm Nina Turner, and I am unbought and unbossed.
Hi, I'm Bartholomew Joseph Kyle. I do audio for the main show, the Young Turks. I also do audio for Post Game. I started in 2006. I met Cenk Uygur at the Iraq for Sale screening that was directed by Robert Greenwald. And watching that, I want to figure out a way to be part of something that's genuine and authentic.
Okay, Bart Kyle has a message to me. Hold on a second. In the Iderola family tree, your grandpa played the sax really well and was not a nerd. John, are you sure you weren't switched at birth from the hospital?
Anna Kasparian, John Iderola with you. Just Bart Kyle playing the sexy tunes.
The saxy tunes,
The saxy
actually.
tunes. I'm a huge fan of the saxophone.
It is cool. It is cool. He's doing that in honor of my grandfather, who played the saxophone among other instruments for many decades.
That's super cool to know. I didn't know that.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, cool. Is that what you guys are talking about on Damage Report these days?
We did like 45 minutes on it.
Nice, nice.
Nothing's really going on, and there are no stakes for anything. So it's mostly my personal family history.
Yeah, I mean, are you really informed if you don't know about John Iderola's grandfather playing the saxophone?
Look, it's as much of a fact as the fact that the House Republicans are going to try to cut Social Security, Medicare.
Right.
They're both just facts.
Oh, by the way, on that point, guys, don't get sucked into the whole debt ceiling debate, okay? Because like, this theater occurs every freaking year, and like it's year 16 for me personally, and hearing about it, covering it, blah, blah, blah. They're not gonna avoid raising the debt ceiling. They're gonna raise the debt ceiling, because if they don't raise the debt ceiling, the global economy freaking collapses, and so does their stock portfolio. And the only thing they care about is their stock portfolio, okay? Right, like why do we keep having this debate every single year as if it's not gonna happen?
I agree but the fear is that a critical mass of really dumb old donkeys are gonna take over enough of the party that they can, I agree that it will in the end probably get raised.
It'll get raised, yes.
But if it doesn't?
Look, the real fear for me is, they're holding certain things hostage, including Medicare, Social Security, that kind of stuff. They want cuts. My fear is that Democrats are gonna play along.
Yeah, maybe.
And they're gonna try to fearmonger, but they won't lift the debt ceiling unless we concede to them.
Yeah.
Because they want to do it themselves too. Not all of them, but some of them, yeah.
And in the meantime, to the millions of conservatives who voted for this majority, like, how do you like that one of the first priorities is cutting the benefits you rely on so that you can live with some dignity post-retirement?
They're such populists.
It's just it's amazing to me that they have no idea what will actually happen.
You see what happened? I got sucked into it. I said I wouldn't this year. Got sucked.
This is why I talked about my grandpa's sax instead. That was lighter. Keep it light.
All right, well, let's get to some of the news for the second hour today, because some bad stuff happening with Tesla worth discussing. Let's do it. You're about to watch a self-driving Tesla vehicle cause an 8-vehicle crash on the San Francisco Bay Bridge. The incident happened on November 24th of last year, just hours after Elon Musk announced that the self-driving feature was available to all Teslas in North America. Now, luckily, no one died in the crash, but 9 people were in fact injured, including a 2-year-old child. The driver confirmed to police that he had the Tesla on self-driving mode. And if you think the vehicle is, if you think the technology is developed enough to the point where you can literally rely on it just being in self-driving mode, you would be mistaken. And that's what the real problem is here. Now, this is not an isolated incident either. A few more details. So Tesla vehicles using its autopilot driver assistance system were involved in 273 known crashes from July of 2021 to June of last year, according to National Highway Traffic Safety Administration data. Tesla's accounted for almost 70% of 329 crashes in which advanced driver assistance systems were involved, as well as a majority of fatalities and serious injuries associated with them, the data shows. So one thing I want to just quickly mention right off the bat is when Tesla first came to the market, it was exciting. I don't even know if there were any other electric vehicles on the market at the time. And if there were, they certainly didn't get the kind of fanfare.
There had been. I don't remember at that point when the Roadster came out. I don't know if there was another full electric.
So now there are other options. Certainly many more affordable options, right? And so I think that the pressure to compete has led Elon Musk to think it's totally cool to roll out and, more importantly, market this feature as if it's fully developed, ready to go. You could totally just rely on the driverless feature without having any concerns. But that's not true. Clearly there are concerns because these accidents have been happening.
Yeah, this can happen. There are other cars that have driver assistance technology. They generally are not marketed as if they're an advanced positronic brain that controls everything.
Yeah.
This is on Elon Musk in the same way that he'll come up with an idea, like I'm gonna just give blue checks to everybody and then just do it. Don't even worry about the code or the consequences, just do it. Like, well, okay, in a social media site, maybe that sort of knee jerk, I had an idea, it's probably the smartest thing anyone has ever thought of before, strategy can work, or at least if it doesn't work, there aren't a lot of consequences for it. But when it's literally thousands of pounds of metal and glass going 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, then suddenly it becomes a little bit more consequential. But Elon Musk fundamentally doesn't care about what happens to people. If you worried about the fact that, maybe, are you gonna get to the fatalities?
I am, yes.
Yeah, okay, well then I won't spoil it just yet. Like, you would dial it back, you would change the branding, you would maybe like put it on hold for a little bit, but he doesn't care about the human cost, the actual human cost of these crashes. He cares about hype and looking like some sort of tech genius or something because he pressured some engineers and coders to come up with the technology and then decided to put it out before it was actually ready.
No, you're exactly right about that. So let's talk a little bit about the fatalities because there have been people who have died as a result. So since 2016, for instance, the federal agency has investigated a total of 35 crashes in which Tesla's full self-driving or autopilot systems were likely in use. Together, these incidents have killed 19 people. Look, guys, a lot of different vehicles at this point have certain technology that's computerized that I think you shouldn't just rely on, right? So I'll give you an example. I have a little Honda Civic. I love my Honda Civic, but it also has this really, really annoying feature, which sounds good, except it malfunctions all the time. It's a feature that automatically like slams the brakes if it thinks I'm gonna rear end another car. There have been times where I'm nowhere near the rear end of another car and it just, out of nowhere, the brakes will be activated and it freaking scares me.
That happens to the Teslas too.
The car behind me thinks I did it on purpose and I'm trying to cause an accident because there are some scammers out there who like will slam their brakes so they can be rear-ended so they can like basically scam your insurance company. And it's terrible, right?
Yeah.
So no one should just rely on, first of all, don't listen to CEOs or executives of these brands and just take what they say at face value, but it's not your fault. Like, I don't wanna put the onus on you. There needs to be better regulations on a federal level to ensure that you don't have executives making false claims about the technology that's included in their vehicles.
Can you disable that feature? The automatic braking? You've got to be able to, right?
I'm sure that you can. It would require me to look at the manual and that.
I will look at it for you because that seems unsafe and I don't want you driving around with that, but.
Please do that.
Okay, remind me after the show.
That would be great.
So, and look, and I will also say, I understand that I'm obviously, if you've been watching this video, very critical of Tesla, very critical, or more so Elon Musk, honestly, because again, like these are engineers being forced to try to do in far too short a time what is effectively impossible. Create an AI that can do all the driving for you. It's not on them that it's not ready yet. They did what they could. He decided it was ready. I'm sure they don't think it is. And I still think, and maybe I'll be proven to be wrong in 10, 20 years, I still think that long term these technologies will eventually need to get out there and be the common way that we drive, because, and this is just to play devil's advocate, while those 19 deaths totally could have been avoided by just actually testing this and not making the human population of your, like the customers of your company, your beta test, like a psychopath. But bear in mind, over 50,000 people die in crashes every single year, and they die in crashes for reasons that aren't that difficult to figure out. It's because people are drinking and driving, they're driving too fast, they're driving while texting, they're driving while on TikTok. The human brain is way more fallible than technology will eventually be. That said, have you driven on LA roads and highways?
No,
people are constantly trying to murder you.
Look, I totally agree with that part.
I just don't trust Elon Musk to be in charge of the regulations. And by the way, there are not nearly enough federal regulations on how this technology can be tested.
Is tested on the roads.
Some states do.
You guys, that's like the biggest issue. Well, all of it's a big issue, right? But the federal government is so pathetic that they don't have regulations in place when it comes to testing this technology on our roads. So you're right, some states have actually taken some initiative and have passed their own regulations, but that's like a handful of states. And we need regulation on a federal level. We need regulation when it comes to private businesses in so many different areas in this country. And that's like one of the problems I have. By the way, when it comes to the phantom braking that I just talked about when it came to my Civic, don't worry, Teslas have the same issue. In recent months, a surge of reports have emerged in which Tesla drivers complained of sudden phantom braking, causing the vehicle to slam on its brakes at high speeds. More than 100 such complaints were filed with NHTSA in a 3-month period, according to the Washington Post.
It's not difficult to figure out why. If you're gonna have technology like this and they're gonna err on the side of either like being too reactive to a perceived threat that might not actually be there, sort of a false positive, versus the opposite, you're gonna err on the side of braking.
Right.
But when you're driving on a fully open highway and all of a sudden it slams on the brakes at 80 miles an hour, that's terrifying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we have to take a break. When we come back, we will talk about one of the most abusive pricks I have seen caught on tape in San Francisco. Don't miss it, we'll be right back.
Ice cream.
Welcome to our social break. You definitely should watch Happy Half Hour after our bonus episode today, twitch.tv/TYT, to watch Brett Ehrlich on Happy Half Hour, and also for some good news and good booze. He's gonna have a bracket today. John, what is the bracket?
Well, I think everyone has been waiting for this. It's the most reasonable thing for a full-grown man to do. It's hottest Disney character.
Nah, I'm here for it. That's great. But wait, there has to be 2 brackets because there are male characters and female characters. So
I say just mash them up. It's all equal. And I don't know who's gonna take down Gaston. I thought at first Lola Bunny, but then I realized that's Looney Tunes.
I'm into Prince Eric from Little Mermaid. So
interesting. You're gonna pass by Ariel and Flounder, by the way.
I'm straight.
For Prince Eric.
By the way, I appreciate beautiful women, but like in terms of what I find attractive, Prince Eric.
Okay, that's fine. I need to I need to see the options. It's been a while since I've watched a lot of. Is adult Nala in the mix? Because she could give some sultry looks. But anyway, I'll have to see what the brackets are.
Do you really Nala like the lion?
Yes, I'm kidding.
Oh, okay.
Kind of.
But be careful, because when you're obviously kidding, people will think you're attracted to animals.
Well, I'm not too worried about it because at least on YouTube, everyone operates in good faith.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. Intellectual honesty, baby.
All right, let's go to our Twitch subs. We've got Peachy Shari who says, "For being sick, you look great. I don't look half as nice when I'm sick. I'm also, we'll just keep it real, I'm wearing makeup."
Are you sick?
I have I woke up having cold-like symptoms. I don't have COVID, don't worry, and I'm obviously not coughing or sneezing or anything, so I'm on a lot of drugs. Let's move on. If I get you sick, you can be very mad at me, but I don't think I will. Dave Schmidt, 311, gifted 2 tier 1 subs. Thank you so much for that. McBain, AKA IC Blue Dragon, says, "I remember when Tim Pool a while ago failed spectacularly in comprehending the difference between an abortion and a live birth." I mean, he fails spectacularly on a daily basis. Eric, 197 says, "Yeah, the party that loves small government sure does love trying to control women's bodies via government legislation." K-Chan 666 resubbed for 30 months and says, "Hey, Anna, I wanted to say you have a very contagious laugh. When you lean back and you're laughing in your chair, no matter what I'm feeling, I have to laugh with you. Thank you." That warms my heart. Thank you for saying that. Let's go to our super chats. We've got Moon Dragon. "I think my wife has a crush on Christian." I get it, girl. I get it. Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian and John Idarola with you. John hosts The Damage Report on the TYT network every day, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. So check that out. What did you guys talk about today?
Pretty much everything. One of the most fun stories was talking about the digital cloning of dead relatives so that you can continue to converse with them afterward. That was a fun conversation.
I think it should be banned.
Why?
It's just, we got to learn to let go. They're not here anymore. I don't know. I feel like I think
it's an interesting technology. I'm not sure exactly what I feel about it.
Yeah. Anyway, all right, okay.
But anyway, you can watch, you can join the Dragon Squad, you can join the Thunder, shop TYT, get some merch, No big deal, it's available online.
All right, let's, this story. I saw this video right before we went live yesterday, and it put me in the worst freaking mood.
Yeah.
So I gotta warn you guys, it's a difficult video to watch. It'll probably put you in a bad mood if you're a decent person, but nonetheless. A San Francisco man was caught being incredibly cruel and abusive to a homeless woman who was laying on the sidewalk. It has been incredibly cold in California. There have been rainstorms, and he decided to hose a woman at during temperatures of 49 degrees Fahrenheit. So, want to warn you, it's a difficult video to watch. It is disgusting to say the least, but here it is. Upscale bar called Barbosa Lounge. Naturally, there was speculation that one of their employees was the individual that you see in the video being abusive and disgusting there, but that is not the case. In fact, Barbosa Lounge came out and said, "This is not one of our employees." I will tell you who the individual is in just a moment, but Barbosa Lounge's statement said this: "Barbosa Lounge has been made aware of a video that has began to circulate on social media, which was filmed outside of our small business. Barbosa is in no way associated with the inhumane actions portrayed in the video. Upon investigation, it appears the actions are those of a neighboring business owner." Now, of course, people on social media who were rightly outraged at that video wanted to know who the guy was. They wanted to know where he worked. And it turns out that they did find the culprit, and he is his business, Neighbors Barbosa Lounge. So he owns some sort of posh art gallery on that street. There you go. Looks like we may have a new candidate for the world's worst human in San Francisco, following the lead of water vigilante Don Soker. Meet Collier Gwynn is his name, a person who owns a gallery. His client list includes David Rockefeller, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and a bunch of other people. So there he is. John, I don't understand the need to abuse people who are obviously suffering and struggling on the streets. Like, what are you doing?
I don't know.
How is that a solution?
Money can't buy class, I guess, for that guy. That should wreck his.
Did you just quote the Real Housewives?
I have a feeling they didn't come up with that.
It was literally a song by one of the housewives. Money can't buy your class. Anyway, let's move on.
And those are all truly original bangers, and all the lyrics were
totally
came up just for them. I don't know. I don't listen to the music, obviously, because it's music. Right. But anyway, getting back to the story, I like to assume that most people would not do what that guy did in that video. That's insane. The casual way that he was just leaning back as he sprayed this person as if they were an insect
that
was
be
crawling on the sidewalk.
Yeah, that's assault. Harming someone physically like that is assault, so he should be prosecuted. So the prosecutor in San Francisco should prosecute this guy. We obviously know who he is now, thanks to people who actually did the investigation the prosecutor should have done online.
It's just like I'm not saying that I couldn't come up with some circumstance where that would be reasonable. If she had been routinely sexually assaulting everyone that walked by or something, maybe he would freak out. I don't think there's any circumstance like that in this.
No.
I think she was there. I think that's the thing that she did. I could be wrong, but that's what I think. To see an old man like that.
He's so proud of himself too. The smug look on his face as he's hurting her like that.
Your entire life was a waste. Everything that you did, every interaction you had, every choice that you made, all the experiences you had have led to you being a person who would treat another human like that and have no problem with it. Have no problem, you're seeing in the eyes of the person that you're abusing that way. Have no problem with people walking by and seeing that that's who you are. Knowing that there's probably a good chance in the modern day that your business is gonna be associated with that behavior, and evidently he thinks that that's to his benefit, that that's gonna help him out. The whole thing is just sick.
So he did admit to spraying the homeless woman. I wanna give you his quote. He says, quote, "In that situation, the street was being washed and she refused to move. She started screaming profanities and became very belligerent. And at that point, the cleaning on the street was directed more in front of her." No, you wanted to be abusive, you assaulted her. That is not an excuse to treat she's a human being, okay?
No, I don't even think that was an attempted excuse. That was an insult. That's all that was. It was directed more at her. That was just him insulting the person that he'd assaulted. That wasn't even a bad attempt to cover for it. That was another assault.
Gwynn said that the woman had been in front of his business and adjacent businesses for almost 2 weeks. Wow. Look, there is a very real homeless crisis in California. I've talked about it. I've said things that, I don't know, I guess the fringe left doesn't like, including showing support for efforts to at least temporarily house people in tiny homes, just like as a middle ground before they get more permanent housing. I think that that's one of many solutions, and for some reason they don't like that. But look, putting that stuff aside for a second, the failure of our federal government on this issue, the failure of our local government on this issue is also something that needs to be discussed, because these are human beings who should be housed. And aside from being housed, we need to stop treating it as if the homeless population is just a monolith, because there are people who need different services. Some people are struggling with drug addiction. Some people have severe mental health issues. We have to acknowledge that, and we have to address that in addition to the housing crisis. And the failure of our government on this issue, we're gonna see more and more of this. because not everyone is kind-hearted, unfortunately. And some people are gonna carry out acts of violence or vigilantism in response to this. I'm not providing an excuse, but it's gonna happen. And when and by the way, and when it does happen, they should be prosecuted. How is this guy giving quotes to, publications in San Francisco? He should be facing charges for this.
Yeah, it happens all the time. People assault and murder unhoused people. It's happened for a very long time. I'm sure it's more common now. Yeah, it's just you don't, just because someone is inconvenient to do, and I get it for a business. It probably is really inconvenient. I get it. It doesn't mean that you get to assault the person. It doesn't mean you get to murder the person.
Imagine not having a home. How inconvenient is that?
Yeah, she doesn't want to be there. Maybe try to bear that in mind. She would very much like to be in a house instead, I'm sure.
All right, God, that's just. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about how gas stoves are being criticized today. Ronnie Jackson not impressed. So there have been some rumors that the government might ban gas stoves. And I just want to let you know that if you came across those rumors, don't worry. There isn't a ban coming up anytime soon, but there are some hazards you should be aware of, and there is a Consumer Product Safety Commission that I think has legitimate concerns, even though I don't want to ban gas stoves. I'm just being honest with you. You're gonna hate me, we're gonna debate. You're gonna be smarter than me because all I have in my arsenal for the debate
is a desire to cook the way you like.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Is anyone saying they're going to come into your condo and take your stove?
Yes.
No.
You know
that's not what the ban is. The ban is a phasing out for new construction.
No, exactly, John.
Yeah, they're not taking yours.
Okay,
they're not taking yours.
Listen, we gotta give the folks the deets, okay? They don't know the deets.
That's a deet. I just deeted them.
Okay. Let's start this again because I totally bungled it. So let's start it again. Gas stoves are at the top of mind for Americans as there have been more and more warnings about the safety risks associated with them. So there have been some rumors that there might be an upcoming ban on gas stoves. That's not gonna happen yet on a federal level, although there have been some new regulations based on which state you live in pertaining to new construction and the inclusion of gas stoves. So what's going on here? Well, on Monday, Richard Trumka Jr., one of the 4 commissioners on the Consumer Product Safety Commission, said this, okay? This is a hidden hazard, meaning the gas stoves. Any option is on the table. Products that can't be made safe can be banned. As it turns out, there are some concerning health impacts associated with gas stoves that I didn't know about and had been largely ignored. So when a gas stove is on, it does release not only a small particulate matter that can enter the lungs, but also nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, and formaldehyde, which, by the way, I just pronounced perfectly, and I'm really proud of myself. All of which, by the way, are also considered health risks, John.
Okay. I don't see how those are going to kill you. Formaldehyde is used to preserve dead bodies, so that seems like, if anything, that would sustain life.
What could kill you is an electric stove that makes subpar food. We'll get to that in a moment, but first, more details on the health risks associated with gas-powered stoves.
At the heart of the issue is medical research showing nearly 13% of childhood asthma cases in the US can be linked to the use of a gas stove. It's one of multiple studies looking into chemicals that enter our homes through stoves.
These are oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, that get released into our homes when we use gas to cook. And those and NOx are well known to contribute to asthma.
Many pollutants are odorless. Consumer Reports also looking into this.
Nitrogen dioxide is a concern because we know that it does have adverse effects on respiratory tract, respiratory illnesses.
You see that? The woke left trying to rob us of our gas stoves, bringing up chemicals that are odorless. They don't even smell bad, John.
And that's the only way that something can hurt you, is if it has to smell bad. Look, people say that we sometimes don't have enough diversity of opinion. We don't bring conservatives on. This is actually, I'm excited, the first time that I'm co-hosting a segment with Tucker Carlson. And so this is an exciting thing for me.
Okay, look, in all seriousness, I do love my gas-powered stove. I will admit that, okay? But of course, I take these safety concerns very seriously.
But not yet.
Not yet. No, but okay, but now I'm being serious. It's fine if, let's say California is phasing out the use of gas stoves, certainly in new construction and stuff like that. That's cool. The problem that I have, mainly with most environmental efforts, is this, honestly, it feels like they always put the onus, the financial onus, on the consumer. And I think there needs, okay, in California, there's no help, by the way. So eventually,
well, the IRA has
hold on,
help.
stop
the IRA
for a
has
second.
helped
Stop.
To transition
Let
to
me
electric
finish
stoves.
my point. Let me finish my point. Let me finish my point. California is moving toward banning the sale of all gas-powered vehicles because they want to go all electric by, I believe it was 2035, which is fine, but okay, at some point when you're unable to buy a gas-powered vehicle, or you're gonna be pressured to buy an electric vehicle, is there gonna be any financial aid in doing that?
There have been up until this point. I would argue that there needs to be more, but
will there be when I do live in a condo, and you know what's gonna happen? Eventually, at some point, there's gonna be an HOA meeting where we're gonna talk about allocating the necessary funds to convert every single unit in the building from gas-powered stoves to electric stoves. Making those conversions is gonna cost money. Is the government gonna help with that?
Well, that's on your HOA if they're deciding to do that. If the regulations aren't requiring it, and the HOA is insisting that you do, then
but the regulations by default will require that.
Well, I will say that,
because when they stop allowing the construction of new homes that include gas-powered stoves and all of that, well, then the technology that we're using slowly but surely will be completely antiquated. We're gonna have to switch to an electric stove when we need a new stove,
and
right?
Horse-drawn carriages eventually became a little bit harder to buy new. Yeah,
okay, but
true.
John, it's a serious concern. Are we gonna get financial aid?
The IRA has money to help you switch over from gas stoves to like $850, very specifically, it does. I don't know if California has a specific thing. It seems like an easy sort of thing for Gavin Newsom to champion and pass, to pretend that he's a true progressive. It is possible they have something like that. And look, it's not like I've been banging the wardrobes on gas stoves for a long time. My house has a gas stove, you know why?
Because they're awesome, that's why.
No, because the house was built in like 1942 and it's probably the original stove that was there.
When the construction of homes was awesome. Continue.
Anyway, look, it has consequences. You now cannot deny what the consequences are. And especially if you're going to be burning a gas, having it be nose high to a child and directly under the food you consume seems like an especially bad way to do it. There are other ways to heat things. I'm not saying we need to take them out of houses, and in that way, I am like everyone else, because nobody, including Richard Trumka or AOC or anyone, is saying they're gonna come in and take your stove. My final point is, it is one thing for conservatives to be like, I don't wanna switch to an electric car. That's a bridge too far, I like my V8. It's a different thing when they say, I don't wanna switch to an electric car. I also don't wanna use solar power. I don't wanna get LED light bulbs. I don't want efficiency standards. I don't want the electric stove. I don't want literally anything. Yeah. I don't wanna eat a little bit less meat. I will not participate in any productive way to help us fight climate change. And if you don't want a couple of the biggest things to be all or nothing, then maybe we can start to make subtle small changes across a wide range of things. But they're not willing to do either of those.
Yeah, I'm not in that camp. And look, at the end of the day, fine, I'll give up my gas stove. I'm not that bitter about it. Except I do think that electric stoves need to improve. I know some of you are gonna write in and be like, no, my electric stove is awesome. No, it's not. It's not. Don't lie to me. But like,
we should all just use microwaves.
Again, no, we shouldn't. My biggest concern is whether people are gonna get the help they need financially to make these changes, because I think the changes are important. Right now, though, I do want to note that the head of the commission threw cold water on the idea that we're gonna, in the near future, ban this federally, ban gas stoves federally. Quote, I'm not looking to ban gas stoves, and the CPSC has no proceeding to do so. CPSC is researching gas emissions in stoves and exploring new ways to address any health risks. CPSC also is actively engaged in strengthening voluntary safety standards for gas stoves. So gas stoves could be improved so they're safer possibly. So that's a possibility here. But finally, this is the part that I really wanted to get to after I kind of dealt with my own feelings about this. Let's go to graphic 7, because the former White House doctor, Ronnie Jackson, not a fan of any of this discussion. And I'm against him. So that's how you know, John, that I'm not one of the bad guys. I'll never give up my gas stove. If the maniacs in the White House come for my stove, they can pry it from my cold, dead hands. Come and take it.
You'll die over your stove? Like, look, I've never understood the argument that you should die over having access to guns, the purpose of which is to stop you from dying. That always seemed a little bit weird to me, but dying over the stove.
He's also, by the way, fundraising off the issue, so that's
of course. No, this is just conservative politics. Literally anything being changed, any regulation is supposed to be the scariest thing ever. Exactly. Nothing should ever improve, nothing should get better.
We've got more news you can use when we come back. Stick around.
They want to make you drink Starbucks every day from now until forever.
They took our jobs.
They took your jobs.
They took your jobs.
Took your jobs.
Welcome back to our social break. In our, I think this is still Twitch. No, YouTube members. Man, I've been sleeping on YouTube members. Sam writes in, Sam Woldalski. I love Wednesdays for the Anna and John banter.
Oh, we
got
do
a little
have nice banter.
Fiery.
Yeah, I like when we disagree.
Me too,
Yeah.
It's fun.
It's a lot more common now that you've turned against the environment.
By the way, be careful because, anyway, I don't want to get
What,
into it.
people will just say that we hate each other now?
No, people think that if you like veer even slightly from whatever the left-wing consensus is on an issue, you're automatically right-wing. That's it, you're right-wing now. Oh my God, you're taking money from Jeffrey Katzenberg. I've never met the guy once in my life.
I literally couldn't pick him out of a lineup of 2.
By the way, Jeffrey Katzenberg, the top bundler for Karen Bass. Something to keep in mind. Anyway, the chips.
Was that a talking point given to you by Jeffrey Katzenberg?
No, it's just fact. You could look it up.
Oh, okay.
The chip. I've never talked to him in my life. I don't even know what he looks like.
I'm sure he doesn't know that you or I exist.
Which is great. The chip says, "Good excuse, Anna. I also use it to take a lot of drugs." Oh, referring to me being sick. No, they're not the fun kind of drugs. Okay, the fun kind of drugs come later after the show. It's Dayquil, Tylenol in the morning when I woke up with a massive headache.
You party girl.
I wish. Daytime Dragon says, I am pro-abortion in the sense that public policy should include free and unrestricted abortions in any circumstance in which doctor and mother agree. I agree with you on that. Iki Taku says, most Americans love Anna, but many don't know it. I agree. I agree with you on that. I don't know what prompted that, but I love it. Griffin78 says, health insurance companies are big business in Nashville. Wonder if that's a factor. It probably is, absolutely. Video posting account says, LOL, I've paid student loans for 10+ years already and it's more than I borrowed. Yeah, that's an issue. Yep. When you're making payments every month and like your principal just continues to go up because of interest, it's a problem.
There should be a maximum amount of interest that can be taken on a loan.
Yeah.
That's it, and then once you've reached that point, it's cleared.
In our super chats, we have Cassandra who says, does anyone seriously think that the fossil fuel industry would disallow banning gas stoves? How quickly we forget who is in charge. I think on a state level, there have been some examples of regulations that will slowly but surely phase out gas stoves. California is one of them. Neil Whittington says, great to catch a new clue with TYT as we do 6 to 8 every weekday at least. You guys and gals find things that we care about 98% of the time. We agree. Thanks, Neil. I like that comment. Stinky Feet says, Anna, use over-the-counter zinc products to block or shorten a cold at the first sign of sickness. I use them and haven't been sick in 4 years. How do you know I haven't? Maybe I have. Which, by the way, I have. We have zinc at home. So maybe.
That and colloidal silver.
Exactly. I mean, I'll be blue tomorrow, but it'll be okay. All right, guys, we got to get back to the show. See you there. Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasperi and John Iadarola with you. Let's talk about a potential win for labor, okay? Because this is an important story, something that I've been paying attention to. I've done stories on it on the show. It has to do with non-compete clauses. In a win for labor, the Federal Trade Commission has proposed a ban on what is commonly referred to as non-compete clauses for employment, which prevent workers from leaving their job to start working at a rival business or taking a job with a competitor. Now, the use of these non-compete clauses has expanded in recent years and has been implemented in cases where it makes absolutely no sense. So if you're working, let's say, for some sort of tech company where there is proprietary information that you could potentially take with you and use against the company with a competitor that you're now working for, I think non-compete clauses might make sense. But when you're a fast food worker and a non-compete clause prevents you from working at, let's say, a different McDonald's that might pay you more, then obviously it doesn't make sense and intentionally prevents you from, increasing your wages and the money you could earn. Now, the FTC announced the proposal last Thursday. Notice it didn't get much attention, but I'm glad we're talking about it now. Here's why the ban would actually help workers out, okay? Studies show that non-competes, which appear to directly affect roughly 20 to 45% of US workers in the private sector, hold down pay because job switching is one of the more reliable ways to secure a pay raise. Many economists believe that they help explain why pay for middle income workers has actually stagnated in recent decades. Although let's keep it real, they've also stagnated because worker unions and things like that have decreased. And so with less bargaining power, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to increase your wages. I wanted to make sure to mention that because it's not just about non-compete clauses. Other studies show that non-compete protect established companies from competition from startups. And so reducing that competition is a huge problem as well. It gives the consumer less options. And the arrangements may also harm productivity by making it hard for companies to hire workers who best fit their needs. Yeah. So I think the FTC is making the right proposal here. John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I liked, I don't know if it was last week or whatever, they had that judgment against, I think, 4 companies for the non-competes that they had. That was a good sign. This is obviously gonna affect far more workers if they get it done. Yeah, it's a reminder. I'm glad that you mentioned the unions. It's a reminder that labor rights is a complex thing that involves a lot of different issues. It's not just pay, it's not just benefits, it's these sorts of things too, arbitration, all of this. And it's a reminder that the path to progress, in some cases, it takes individual workers organizing their own workplace. In some cases, it takes hopefully getting the right people in positions of power to appoint people to organizations like the FTC and hope that that will point them in the right direction and pay dividends over time.
Exactly. Now, I'll give you some evidence to why this is such a great idea, the proposal, I mean. So according to a 2019 study from the Economic Policy Institute, they do great work, more than a quarter, 29% of responding establishments where the average wage was less than $13, can't even freaking believe this, use non-competes for their workers. Okay, it's just their way of controlling wages. They've found a roundabout way to do it. Here's an insane example from a complaint that the FTC filed last week against Prudential. The 2 affiliated Michigan-based companies and their owners, Greg Wire and Matthew Keywell, exploited their superior bargaining power against low-wage security guards, requiring them to sign contracts containing restrictions get this, that prohibited them from working for a competing business within a 100-mile radius of their job site with Prudential for 2 years after leaving Prudential.
Had they been trained in like proprietary martial arts techniques or something?
No, of course not.
Yeah, no, this is just BS. As you said, it's one way of sort of secondhand controlling wage growth, but it's also to lock down workers.
Yep.
You don't want them transitioning. And when I try to think about like
turnover, right? Because turnover, look.
Well, we're certainly complaining a lot about it recently.
Yeah, exactly.
It's one way to control it.
If you're a worker and you feel like, okay, I don't like these working conditions, I feel like I'm being taken advantage of, I want to move to a different company. And like, let's say you're a security guard, that's what you do, that's what you're good at. Based on what Prudential did here, you can't go be a security guard within a 100-mile radius. So it prevents an unhappy employee from leaving.
Yeah, for years, like I think about how this could have, like I was a waiter like through college and through grad school. Imagine if there had been non-competes on you can't take a different waiting job or something.
Insane.
Yeah, I guess they just didn't think of it because they could do something like that. No, it's inherently anti-worker. There are some cases where it makes sense in tech companies, some sort of security, maybe, but the vast majority of workers, it makes no sense whatsoever, except from the point of view of the owners.
And by the way, there are fines that come along with violating the non-compete clauses. So in the case of Prudential, it required employees to pay $100,000 as a penalty for any alleged violation of the clause, the FTC noted. So look, I like that there's some positive movement happening in the country when it comes to labor rights, whether it's workers organizing their workplace. I think the Biden administration's National Labor Relations Board has been pretty good, especially relative to previous administrations. And now we're hearing some good news from the Federal Trade Commission. Great. So this doesn't just happen out of nowhere. It happens when workers really start to take their power back. Let's keep that going. It's good news overall. All right, we only have a few more minutes. I'm going to go ahead and tease the stories we're going to talk about in the bonus episode. Dave Rubin now advocating for monarchies and against democracy because he's stupid. So we'll talk about that in the bonus episode. It's going to be a fantastic story, don't miss it. The K9 bus, what is it and why aren't we on it? One of my favorite stories of the day. So it's going to be a great bonus episode. You can become a member by going to tyt.com/join, or if you're watching us on YouTube, you can click on the join button and become a member that way. I do want to also get back to some of our member comments. Let's start actually with some super chats in case some of you are not members. I want to read your comments. Jedi Dragon says, I completely agree with Anna that the debt ceiling hostage situation is something we shouldn't negotiate with. My argument though is we shouldn't even be overly concerned because they will raise the debt ceiling because they're all heavily invested in the stock market. They don't want their portfolio to suffer. And it will suffer if they don't raise the debt ceiling. M. Rochelle says, I've only gotten a tax refund because of COVID, yet somehow I still owe the same amount. 3 years of my refund more than covered it. I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to, but I'm glad I read your comment. So thank you for writing in. Peter Hamby says, who knew Elon was involved in the remake of an old Japanese manga, OVA X Driver? It's definitely the Tesla run for a cult classic. I don't know what that is, John.
I'm not familiar with that. I assume it's something with cars gaining sentience or something.
Yeah. You haven't seen that manga.
No, I have not.
Okay.
It's the one that I missed.
Pitchfork's Dragon says, Santa Rosa, California was #1 in homeless per capita in America. When residents found out homeless in their area devalued their property, they housed them all 100. Yeah, it's interesting because there's been, I think, a completely different reaction by wealthy people, including stopping any effort in building more housing, which we desperately need. Because in their minds, well, if we build more housing and there's more inventory, that means the value of our homes might come down. That's honestly the biggest issue that I see here. When housing is commodified the way it is, when it's really the only way that working people can build wealth in this country, then they try to protect it with every fiber of their being. So, you have to understand the incentives and disincentives. And so when we talk about NIMBYism, that's really what's behind it. And we gotta find a way to squash that kind of thinking, because we're never gonna build housing if we allow them to basically dictate our approach to homelessness. We've got Jonathan who says, instead of housing her, he could fight to house her.
Instead of hosing her.
Oh, hosing. Well, it was a typo. It says housing, but yeah, you meant hosing. So instead of hosing her, he could fight to house her. Government has us fighting each other. It's sad. I totally agree with you on that. And unfortunately, like I said, you're gonna see more of this terrible treatment of homeless people, this vigilantism, as our government continues to fail us in getting people the help that they need. And it's really depressing to see it happen. All right, everyone, we gotta take, actually, main show's over. If you're a member, see you in the bonus episode, tyt.com/join.
The rest of the news media says you should not fight for positive change. If you do, you're not really a reporter or a journalist, because